So we jumped in the car from Hanford and drove out here, and I saw these flags. And of course, it was awe-inspiring, and it was a beautiful sight. And they looked like really nice decorations for a Memorial Day celebration. And it wasn't until the following year, I kind of made it my own little tradition to drive through here whenever the flags were up, that I saw Corky here ramrodding things around here and giving orders and pointing fingers. And I was driving through, and he pointed out to me that these flags are for individuals. These flags are not decorations, and of course I had no knowledge of that. But for every soldier that these flags represent, they are heroes. Some of them were heroes in combat, and some of them died in combat. But many of them had to endure the scars of war in the battlefield once they came home. And the struggles they carried with them throughout their lives as they participated in the freedoms for which they fought. And again, whether they fought for those freedoms on the battlefield or whether they carried on the ideals of the American dream and American democracy here at home by their participation in events. And it's probably the flag saying hurry up, right? So, this is one time that being short really helps because the flag isn't hitting me. But nevertheless, when we think of this day, we think of the freedoms that war brings us. And it is only as a last resort that we go to war in order to fulfill the ideals of democracy and freedom around the world. When we think of this day, we often think of the old gray-haired veteran repeating the stories of war. But this day is also about those veterans who died on the battlefield at a very young and tender age. This country was built and all of our freedoms have been sustained on 18 to 20-something-year-olds throughout our 230-some-year history. And when you hear the old gray veterans tell us about their comrades who died next to them or who later died in the hospital from their battle scars, you can only weep. But we should also be having a sigh of gratefulness, because without those sacrifices, without that desire to give one's life for the freedoms that we enjoy, these freedoms would never exist. And so it has been said that the young soldier actually gives up two lives when he dies on the battlefield, the one that he's living and the one that he could have lived. And so it is incumbent upon us that we repeat their stories and that we repeat their names so that they too will live on. And so these young soldiers never had the opportunity to grow old and live the lives that many of us take for granted. So we should not forget their sacrifices. Many Memorial Day celebrations and ceremonies and speeches and perhaps barbecues today will be with family and friends, and that is all good. Because during those times we should be honoring those who made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom and the American way of life. During these ceremonies and during these gatherings, we should call to mind the valor and the bravery of these soldiers and remember that they gave their lives so that others might live. And these remembrances are good to do. When he spoke during a ceremony at Gettysburg in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln reminded us that through their deeds, the dead have spoken more eloquently for themselves than any of the living could ever do. And the living could only honor them by rededicating ourselves to the cause for which they so willingly gave a last full measure of devotion. President Lincoln's speech in 1863 still rings true today, and it is our deeds that we can do to carry on the memory of fallen soldiers and fallen veterans, just to say thank you to them for our freedoms. But a traditional Memorial Day ceremony should also include remembrances of some of those young soldiers who gave their lives, such as Private Treptow. Private Martin Treptow was a young soldier in a Midwest town who gave up his job in a barber shop in 1917 to go fight in France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between the battalions while under heavy artillery fire. We are told that his diary was found upon his body, and that in that diary was the words written in his own hand. And at the title it said, "This is my pledge." And Private Treptow wrote, "America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure, I will fight cheerfully, and I will do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. Another traditional Memorial Day speech would repeat the story of Signalman First Class Douglas A. Monroe, who served in the United States Coast Guard, who at age 22, and in 1942, there at the Battle of Guadalcanal, was in charge of 5 Coast Guard vessels. Those Coast Guard vessels were tasked with delivering 500 Marines to the shores and to bring the wounded back. In doing so, again, heavy artillery fire hampered their efforts, but Signalman Monroe directed his ship to run interference and to receive that heavy gunfire. In doing so, he lost his life on that ship. At age 22, I remind you of that. And in the Coast Guard's 228-year history, he is the only sailor to have received a Medal of Honor for those efforts. The commitment, dedication, and grit exemplified by Private Treptow and Signalman Monroe is the benchmark of the American soldier to this day. And we could find hundreds of stories of individuals who have done exactly the same thing as these two servicemen. But let me say clearly that nowhere else in human history will you find any weaponry or arsenal that is deployed in the name of freedom and democracy that can compare to a soldier from the United States of America. The U.S. soldier is unmatched, and that is why for more than 230 years the American idea of freedom and democracy has expanded around the world, and why we still fight for it today. The living are incapable of appropriately honoring and repaying the heroes who come to mind today. It simply is not within our power. Only God has that capability. But we can pay tribute and remember their sacrifices by being here today and carrying on their memory every day of the year, and to rededicate ourselves to the sacrifices for which they died. Abe Lincoln is also quoted as saying the best way to honor our soldiers is to reiterate the cause for which they died, and to do that every single day, and to redouble our efforts as we move forward in the world's conflict to spread democracy and freedom. And of course, I could end right now, and I would have fit the traditional remembrances that are usually done at such addresses, and the traditional acknowledgments of the American soldier, strength and power. And I will have also imparted upon you a call to remember the sacrifices made for our freedom, not just today, but every day as we go about our mundane lives and take life for granted. Today we strive to remember heroes from our communities across America. We seek to remember these soldiers not because it makes a good story, but because it underscores the sacrifice and commitment that has given us the lives we live today. But I'm not typically a traditional person, so let me impart upon you some other heroes and some other soldiers who may not have died as Treptow and Monroe, but they certainly fought for our freedoms. And the government officials and statisticians often say and have said that the estimated 1.1 million soldiers have given their lives for our freedoms. That number fails to account for those who live to tell about their battle scars, and fails to account for those who come home and live the lives with us and endure their freedoms as we do. And that number fails to account for the sadness and sacrifice that they live with as they try to reintegrate back into a society. And much like Vietnam soldiers were forgotten about when they came home, and now I'm glad that we finally remember them and their sacrifices, and every soldier since the Civil War, quite frankly. But some scars are not visible. We have 3 times the number of soldiers who are dying in our current conflicts around the world who come home with injuries. And they too have struggles. And as I reiterate that every soldier is forever changed, and it is important that we remember those veterans who have a new journey to cope with in their injuries and their daily lives. Unfortunately, nearly 22 veterans every single day succumb to their battle scars as they return home, and they're often forgotten. They are not counted in that 1.1 million statistic that we see from the government and the statisticians. So I implore you to think about those 22 Americans who take their own lives every year, who do not and are not able to cope with the realities of returning to home. They too have sacrificed for our freedoms. And lastly, non-traditionally, I'd like to remember the families of the fallen and the families of our current servicemen and women. Remember their struggles to endure every single day as they work hard here to carry on their memories and to carry on the legacy of their veterans. The loved ones and the families of those loved ones are all heroes. Because if we ever forget and choose to ignore the sacrifice of the American soldier and the causes for which they have sacrificed and died, then we are doomed as a nation and as a people. I want to close by saying that I ask you to remember that in World War I, approximately 12% of American citizens were enlisted in our military and fought for the rest of our citizenry. In Vietnam, that number shrank to 5%. And let me say that I am proud that we, again, have recognized our Vietnam veterans appropriately today. But in today's military, in our conflicts in the Middle East, we have merely 2% of American citizens fighting for 98% freedom. So let me leave you with a call to action that we, the 98% of Americans, never stop remembering, never stop supporting, and never stop believing in the American soldier and the freedoms for which we have. God bless you all, and God bless America.